com or 23me, but he found us, and now I'm running as fast as I can to stay away from him. How you doing there, nephew?
Indeed, I'm doing well, Uncle Rhett. How are you today?
I'm only kidding about that. You know, I'm delighted you're in my life already. I love you. You're my brother's son, and what a great Christmas gift a year ago to suddenly know that you're in my life. And this happened twice. In case people don't know the story, give them succinctly tell them the story. In a minute or less of what happened.
Well, my paternal sister. So Scott is our father, your brother. So she found you years ago, and then I did a DNA test with Ancestry, found my maternal family, and then I did a DNA test with 23me.com and found my paternal family. I linked to Cece, who is my sister and your niece.
Which is quite amazing, because you not only got Cece as your half-sister, then you found out you have a half-sister who's an attorney at law in upstate New York. You have another half-brother, right?
Yes.
Or two. Is it one or two?
One. So I have three siblings in total, a paternal sister and a maternal sister and brother. And I couldn't be luckier. They're all awesome.
And your mother, who I knew it from my teens. We were friends, Linda and I, and now not only are we reconciled, but now she's a part of my family forever. And so you have enriched me. It's just pretty dang incredible that we're all together now. Of course, you have to put up with your Uncle Rhett, who has a radio show down in Florida.
So, James, how did you like the idea that you had an uncle who was a radio host?
How do I like it?
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that a great discovery?
Yeah, well, it was very cool, and to see the musical connection, between Uncle Rhett and my dad, it's amazing.
Well, what's amazing is my brother had a preference for the flute, and he also played the keyboard, and was a little more inclined to go electronic than Radio Rhett. I'm more into acoustic. I like violins, cellos, So anyway, so we meet, and guess what the two instruments are that James plays? He plays the flute, and he's exceptional on the keyboard, and he does this sort of techno pop. I don't know how you could categorize it. It's not the stuff that's really my flavor. It was my brother's flavor. I'm still not that crazy about it, but I've also heard you play recently some acoustic piano, and the melodic stuff you do is phenomenal.
Thank you. Yeah, that was made on a synthesizer, but it's a grand piano sound. So yeah,
I loved it.
It's may as well be acoustic.
I loved it. Now you have a special guest on the line today, and who is this fella?
Mr. Thomas Ahern. He is the Senior Vice President and of Business Development for Calo Programs.
Calo.
Good morning, Thomas.
Good morning, guys.
Hey, Thomas. So what is Calo? What's that all about?
Well, Calo, we're a family of specialized treatment centers that works primarily with young people who have experienced early life trauma, often complicated or impacted by adoption. We have 3 different units, if you will, an outpatient set of programs, a residential set, and a wilderness therapy set of programs in 5 states.
Huh. Now, of course, that causes people to get stuck emotionally, I think, right? By the way, in case you didn't know it, I also was adopted in this. I spent my life with my biological mother, but my biological father was killed in a car accident, and then I was adopted by a fellow my mom married for 6 short years. Very impressionable years, though, from 6 to 12. And then then later on changed my name back to my birth name and never saw that other fellow again. But that's a semblance of being, I mean, it was legally adoption, so I don't know how that counts with you guys. But
sure counts, yeah.
But this puts a lot of, tell us the trauma that a lot of these people go through, and what do you do? You yourself are adopted, right?
Yeah, I was adopted. I was given up for adoption at 3 days old, and ultimately about a year and a half. At a year and a half old, I was adopted into a family of 4 other adopted children in East Hartford, Connecticut. Grew up with some great parents, and had a really nice middle class life. But what happens oftentimes is when we talk about trauma, and this is kind of the issue, is that when there's a separation in the caregiver relationship, that something happens and it creates some vulnerability for people later on in life. And, oftentimes the stress that goes along with a newborn baby when they're separated from that individual that they've been preparing to meet for 9 months in uterine, because we now know from the literature and the research that children can hear, they smell, and the rhythm of the heartbeat and all of that stuff. They're pre-programmed to make that connection, to attach to that caregiving bond, and then when that gets separated early in life, then it causes complications and sets people up for interpersonal problems later in life, and a variety of other things. I'm not trying to say that every single person has complications. It just creates some vulnerabilities that oftentimes with the young people that we're treating, there's usually some other form of something else happened, whether it's neglect or abuse or death or financial hardship. That creates those complications, and that's what results in young people being sent to us to be helped to heal those wounds.
Yeah. Now, as you said, this baby, this embryo, is used to the mother's blood. It's used to the mother's fragrance, and we find out more and more how fragrances influence our lives. Now, Moses, for instance. Moses was put on the water, and he himself was adopted by the Pharaoh's family. But am I mistaken? Wasn't it? Did his actual mother, care for him in Pharaoh's house without Pharaoh knowing it? I forget the story. But
maybe James can help us out with that one.
James knows nothing. James knows nothing biblically. He's
doesn't want to.
No.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. So now you're not to speak for James. He can speak for himself.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so you 3 days because they do say this. They say that people who are taken away from their mothers right initially sometimes tend to have, maybe it's a lack of love, or they're not nurtured, or they're not held. They say they tend to be not mass murderers, but they can be very bad individuals, that they have no connection to the human family. They're somehow, this separation can be very traumatizing to the baby and can affect them the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of a complicated task that you ask people who are given up for adoption. You're in many ways they're being asked to attach to something that's really foreign to them, that their body and nature hasn't really prepared them to do. So, in many ways, I think of adopted people as actually having more of a problem with adjustment. And what we're asking them to do, if we were asking anybody to do that, some of the behaviors or characteristics that we notice or that we diagnose are actually pretty normal, given the context of the situation. So, we do know that about 70-75% of the time, adoption is a pretty good solution to a social problem, and it works out most of the time. What we're specialized in is helping to treat and understand and have compassion towards the 30-35% that have more difficulties and need to reach outside of the home for additional support or understanding or treatment. And that's where it comes in. I grew up in a family of a total of 5 adopted kids altogether.
Wow.
None of us ended up in residential treatment. But I had a brother who died of schizophrenia. I have 2 younger sisters who weren't able to complete high school.
Why?
But none of them ended up in therapy.
Why couldn't they finish high school?
Well, as with the kind of kids that we treat, it was more of a complex traumatic environment where, my adopted father, who, by the way, when we talk about adoption, language is really important.
Okay.
So, when I talk about my parents, I like to say that the parents are the people that brought me up. Those are the people that took care of me when I was sick and helped me get to school and, taught me how to tie my shoes and went to my baseball games. Those are my parents. So but then my birth parents are the people that were responsible for me, being on this earth. So, unfortunately, my father, died when I was 14 years old at my wrestling match, just dropped dead in my coach's arms, essentially.
Wow.
And that, I think, complicated things even further.
Well, that happens.
Similarly,
That happened to the man who's on the line too. James.
Oh yeah, really, James?
Well, so yeah, at the same age. I mean, my dad passed away when I was 15, so it's a difficult time in your life to lose someone so important to you.
Yeah.
Especially if that's one of the main things that's sort of been holding you together, like keeping one foot on the ground while the other one is sort of fragmented, sort of hidden. So my original birth name was Stefan Roberto McCarthy, and I use that name to just help describe that, Stefan doesn't sort of go away. He just lurks somewhere underneath it all, trying to figure out how not to be rejected again or given away again. So the journey of the adopted person is to figure out what I'm supposed to do to survive. When you're given away at birth, and you grow up very vigilant and hypersensitive to loss, abandonment, and those kinds of things. So you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to attach to this family and this system that doesn't feel natural, but you think that's what you're supposed to do. In the meantime, you've got this other person lurking in the background, wondering where's their place in the world. And so ultimately, at the ripe old age of 57, and having completed both my searches and reunite my birth parents, and be able to bring Stefan out of the closet, so to speak, and to integrate with Thomas Ahern, that's ultimately the goal. Is the option to sort of bring those two pieces together and separate the wheat from the chaff and create one identity. And that's one of the reasons I give this talk where I met James is because that process helps to heal, and it helps to integrate, and it helps to get both feet on the ground so that you can actually fulfill your potential as a person.
Now, one thing I want to make sure that we do today, and that is this. We're talking about certain things, which is great. It's great to talk about things. But if I might ask you, when we can, let's tell stories that punctuate, because there's an old American Indian saying, and it is that if you tell me a fact, I'll learn. You tell me a truth, I'll believe. But if you tell me a story, it will live in my heart forever. And sometimes we talk about things, but I think the way to pull in the audience is to say, okay, if this happens, and even if you have to make up a story, or of course, best of course is a story that you can relate to that's true, but to demonstrate what happens in situations, wherever you can apply what I just said to, that would be appreciated. All right.
Sure.
So I mean, like the fact that you lost your dad, that's and you were how old? 14?
Yeah, I was 14 years old, and I was wrestling at East Hartford High School in Connecticut, and I had just completed my match, and I went downstairs to take a shower, and after the shower, I came back upstairs, and I saw a teacher named Mr. Harvey. I mean, these are things that are ingrained in my brain, and he says, "Have you seen your sister?" And I'm like, no, I haven't seen my sister. And so he goes, "You better go see her right away." So I'm walking across the auditorium or the gym in front of 500 people. And needless to say, I didn't know that an ambulance had just come and wheeled him out 5 minutes before I came in the door. And I just looked at my sister and I'm like, "What's up?" And she goes, "Daddy had a heart attack." And from there, I just sort of collapsed. And next thing you know, and this part's probably really foggy, I was sitting in the back seat of somebody's car on my way to a hospital, and I walked into St. Francis Hospital, which you're probably all familiar with, because at least James is, because he's from Connecticut. And I see my mother, and she looks at me, and I had this fantasy I was going to see my father, for whatever reason, sitting in a wheelchair with socks on and a bathrobe or something, and he was going to be okay. But when I walked through the door into this back room where they led me, I saw my mom, and she said, "Daddy's dead." And from there, I just started bawling my brains out, and the rest is pretty much a blur. But it was really at that point, that was a seminal time for me, as it is with many adoptees, by the way, that when there's a major life transition, whether it be a divorce or a marriage or a death, is that's when they want to start their search. And that seminal moment for me was really the beginning of my search for my identity.
And if there's one thing that the mayor of the airways wants to see changed, it's the fact that who in the hell is the government, the United States government, or any other organization? Where do they get the nerve to think they should be able to thwart someone seeking out their roots to give them psychological balance and stability. I do not understand the coldness of heart or the manipulation or whatever it is, because just people never cease to amaze me at the way they want to control other people's lives. I mean, everybody ought to just let Muslims be Muslims, let the Christians be Christians, let the Jews be Jews, let the atheists be atheists, and let's let everybody just be who they are. If we'd all just back off instead of trying to control everybody, you know what I'm saying? But I want to make sure that we just don't talk about these things, because my greatest concern now is that we're going to have all these radio shows, and is anything ever going to change? How are we going to change the legislation? So was there a wall there that you couldn't get through? Were you not allowed to seek out Yeah,
great question. And, you'll be happy to hear that I was part of the 10-year process of helping to get Connecticut at least open their records from 1983 on. We failed this year, but we're awfully close and working really closely with the folks there. But the long and short of it is, so after my father died, I was able to, being the curious kid that I was, I went into his bedroom and started going through some stuff, and I found this gray box, and I brought it up into my room, and there I was. I found my adoption certificate, all my original stuff, and, the amended birth certificate, which, so I didn't have an original birth certificate. So I immediately said, okay, so I was too young to get anything. So I hid that stuff in my closet for a couple of years. But on my 18th birthday, I went down to probate court and said, hey, I want my birth certificate. And henceforth began the process. I'm 57 years old. I still have never seen an original birth certificate. I was the first person to sue the state of Massachusetts to try to get that birth certificate.
Hold on. This causes for a round of applause. Let me have some applause, Mr. B, right now. All right, I applaud you, and we applaud you. That's terrific.
So, but the point of the matter was, it's a long and sort of complicated story. As a young 18-year-old, I did everything from trying to. I talked to my family physician and told him my story. I asked him to pretend I had cancer, and would he call and get my birth certificate?
Wait. So you had to feign having cancer in order to solicit your birth certificate, so you could find out the DNA of your family, or?
Well, I just wanted to find out the name of my. I knew that my name was Stefan Roberto McCarthy, but I didn't know my parents' name. And ultimately, I really just wanted. I needed. I didn't want to. I needed to survive, to know their name, and ultimately to meet them. I just needed to meet them, and nothing was going to stop me. And ultimately,
and did you?
Yeah, eventually I did. I finally met my birth mother at 19 years old, but I had to. I fixed the guy's brake lines to get the money to pay this guy from that I learned through the University of Rhode Island. This guy was Paul Zanowski out of Westerly, Rhode Island. He had some kind of in Massachusetts because they have centralized records, births, deaths, marriages, and stuff like that. And because I had my birth name, I had to pay him $100, and he was able to get that to get my mother's name, and ultimately tracked her down and got a phone number. And to this day, I still have the original tape from 1979, which I play in my talks for the audience, so they can actually hear what my birth mother says when he said. Stefan Roberta McCarthy, born March 29th, 1960.
All right.
And she says, well, it looks like he's found his mother.
Yep. I have to take a break now. If people want to get in touch with you, why would they?
Well, there's lots of reasons why. One,
well, I tell you what, why don't you? I really haven't got time.
We'll talk about it after the break.
Yeah, well, okay, but give your website out now, because we're not going to come back on the recorded session afterwards. So go ahead. What's your website?
Okay, great. www.caloprograms.com.
I just came upon something off air, though. I think that this April, we know that Thomas is going to be speaking, and we're thinking maybe of broadcasting from this convention that they're going to be putting on. Explain what's going to happen in April, if you would, Thomas.
Yeah, it's essentially a mini conference. It's a one-day conference on a Sunday, and I'll be there with my chief clinical officer from Calo Programs. His name is Rob Gent. And we give an opportunity to give sort of a high-level overview of my story, but we take the story beyond a little deeper this time, where we talk about what kind of impact this stuff has had on my life more currently, and how that has influenced my relationships as a father, as a husband, and my career and things of that nature. So we try to make things a little more contemporary, since usually in my Healing the Dark Side of Adoption journey story, I tell what happened from early in life up to the search and reunion, and then ultimately meeting my father, and then reuniting both my birth parents at my son's graduation. But we don't usually have the time to sort of get into what kind of impact all that stuff had on your current functioning, and how you doing today. How does that influence things today in your marriage and things like that? So I think there's a lot of adult adoptees, the closed record adoption folks that are getting older in life now. There's a lifelong impact here that has to be addressed, and sometimes there's people out there, similar to James, haven't even met their parents until late in life, or didn't even learn they were adopted until late in life, and they've always known something was up, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And so having this kind of open dialogue gives people, and sometimes it's transformative for people. So that's what we're going to give people the opportunity to interact with and ask their questions and see where it goes.
Sounds good. So that's where my nephew James. That's where you met Thomas.
Yeah, and I think I'll ask Cece to fly down too, which is my paternal sister, Thomas. And my natural mother, I bet, will come again. She was there the first time.
Really? Was she?
Yeah.
Hey, it'd be a good excuse for us all to be together too.
We were the only other natural mother and child in the room. There were a lot of adoptive parents in the room.
Okay.
And Rhett, by the way, my birth mother was there, and I had three sons of mine there as well. So we actually, during that time, I was able to actually seduce those guys into coming and participating a little bit and answer some questions. So it's always powerful when you have a birth mother. I would have loved to be able to do a presentation with my birth mother, my mom, and myself, the complete the adoption triad or triangle that it's called. Because in these things, you have to be sensitive and compassionate to every side of that triangle, which is the birth mom, the adoptive mom, and the adopted person. Those three are really important when it comes to understanding and treating this stuff.
So, okay, well, what do we talk about next, James?
What do we talk about next?
Yeah, where were we before we were so rudely interrupted by the news? I know.
I just met my birth mother. The stuff that's pretty powerful is when I met my birth father, how I met my birth father, and then bringing my birth father and my birth mother together for the first time.
Hold on. Let's set it up. Hold on. Now, you have you have your parents, who are the people who adopted you, who you love very much. Your father dies at 14, this parent, who you just cherish and love. Same thing happened to James. He loses his father. I don't know what was medically. It doesn't really matter. But he dies. And both of you are traumatized. Now, all of a sudden, you want to find your roots. But the government stands in your way, which should be illegal. So you cannot get the information till you're 18. But you bide your time. And the day you turn 18, you're downtown. You say, I want my birth certificate. So let's go from there.
Okay, great.
Take it, Thomas.
Oh, okay. So ultimately, that became several years of a journey of trying to figure out how I was going to get these records. And people were very, understanding of. They wanted to hear the story, but nobody could actually do anything about it until ultimately I realized that was just not going to happen. So I went through the black market essentially in order to find my birth mother. And once I did that, then it became a process of another 20-something years of trying to figure out how can I find my birth father, because I had a lot of fantasies. Adopted people often have fantasies about, as you're walking down the street, you're going, could that be my father? I mean, I had this dream that I would walk past him in a grocery store, and if I did, the world would come to a stop for 1 second, and we both looked at each other and would go, There it is. We're connected.
You're carrying a torch for this hope, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a long lost love that you're never going to get back, but you think you see her everywhere. She's in the crowd.
Yeah.
She's by the ocean. Yeah. She just drove by. She's at a red light. You're looking all over constantly. I know. I've lived it. I know what you're talking about, man. And it's really carrying. Huh?
I'm so you're done. Sorry.
No, go ahead, James. What were you going to say?
Thomas, what do you mean when you said you went to the black market to find your mom? Please explain that a little.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, there was my sister went to the University of Rhode Island, and she saw a pamphlet that was just up on the like you were to see the off-campus housing announcements, and it says, "Are you adopted?" So it caught my sister's eye, and she brought it home and says, "If you're adopted, we can help." So I called the guy, and like I said, because I had some of the basic information, I just had to pay him $100, and he could get that information for me. And he made the phone call, and I got that on tape, as I said, and then we arranged for the reunion. And so I met her down in Westerly, Rhode Island, at a bar, actually, and that's where I met Gordon Dalton, who was her husband at the time. And I ended up naming my third son after him because he was such a positive influence on my life. And then it began, just getting to know her and figuring out how to integrate her, or if I could integrate her. And that's been a lifelong process in and of itself. But I was able to get her to make our first joint presentation at the American Adoption Congress conference last year, believe it or not, in Atlanta, Georgia. So that was a healing process for both of us to be able to tell this story, and what it was like for her to receive that first phone call from a foreign guy saying, hey, this baby is all grown up now, and he'd like to know who you are. So for her to have the courage to say, okay, let's do it, is a testament to her courage and our relationship. So then it became a process, another 20-something years of trying to track down Arthur Davis Jr., which was the name of my birth father. And that, I called every single Arthur Davis Jr. in the country. I wrote them all letters. And it took me many, many years until one day, by haphazard, I was frustrated. I could not get an answer. I called the Bethlehem Historical Society because I knew that's where the Davises were from, that area. Just by this older woman picks up the phone and says, hello, and I'm like, so I tell her a little bit of the story, and she goes, Arthur Davis Jr., and I think he built my house. So next thing you know, she gave me a lead, and the lead was in Mesa, Arizona. And I knew from my phone calls and my research that there were only 2 Arthur Davis Jr.'s in Arizona. So I kept calling. One of the phones got disconnected. So I had it down to one call. And then finally, the long story, so you'll have to come on April 8th to hear, but but ultimately an older woman picked up the phone, and I immediately went, oh my God, I have a grandmother that's still alive. Hello? I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for Arthur Davis Jr. She goes, oh, you just missed him. And I'm like, oh my, would you like his cell phone number? I'm like, yeah. So she gave me his cell phone number. And long and short of it was I couldn't get a hold of him. I didn't realize he was a snowbird, and he went between Mesa, Arizona, and New Hampshire. But at the time I was trying to call him, he was up in the Grand Canyon, and he hadn't got any of his mail because he was a snowbird. So the letter that I mailed to every Arthur Davis Jr. was sitting in a pile in his house, and I couldn't get through the cell phone because he was in the Grand Canyon where there was no reception. So I ended up calling this older woman back, and I finally, my wife was like, tell her. So I finally told her the story, and she says to me, we've never had that discussion before. And next thing you know, I'm having this 2-hour conversation with my grandmother. My word. And what I learned was that she had adopted a daughter that was my father's sister growing up. Subsequently, she had passed. And that she had remembered my birth mother. And that ultimately, by the time we get off the phone, she just said to me, I love you. And we hung up the phone.
Oh, my word.
And I waited for the phone call to ring. Another couple of weeks went by, and I finally get this call from this guy saying, who are you and why are you calling my mother? And I told him the story, and I asked him to read the letter that I had sent him. And he said, okay, I'll tell you what. I can't remember. It's a long time ago. But I'll tell you what, I come back that way in September, and I'll give you a call, and we'll have a cup of coffee and straighten this out. So I'm like, okay. So I wait a couple of months.
Now, this is your dad? This is your dad?
This is my birth father. Yeah, this is my birth father, Arthur Davis
So he
Jr.
wants to put the pieces together to see if he really,
Yeah. He couldn't remember.
I believe it.
He had checkered past that I now that, he had some alcohol issues when he was younger, and so it all started to come together. And that kind of thing. So
I know where that's at. She goes, hey, did we have dinner last night? Yes, you ate 3 plates of spaghetti. I did? I said, listen, damn it, if I'm going to eat all those calories, I damn well want to be sober enough to remember it. That's supposed to be funny, guys.
It was.
Yeah. Play the applause again. Very good, Mr. B.
Yeah, that's his.
So tell us. I want to hear about this meeting when he finally comes down.
This is exciting,
that
man.
area.
This is exciting. People right now, they're really ticked off. What are you doing with these sound effects? So what happened over the cup of coffee?
So he a man of his word, a couple months go by, and he finally calls on a Saturday morning, and he says, hey, come on down to the beach, and I'll be in the largest vehicle in the parking lot. So I drive down to the beach, and there he is in this 50-foot motorhome. So I knock on the door. The door opens. I take 2 steps up into the motorhome, and I look at him. He looks at me, and he goes, well, we're not going to need a DNA test for this one. Because we looked like identical twins, only he was about 3 inches taller than me, but we both have no hair. We're both bald, shaved heads, and similar, facial features. And next thing you know, we're sitting down talking.
Now hold on. Now, I'm a syrupy kind of guy because when James first called me, I kept crying privately. Did you guys hug and have tears in your eyes or?
God, I wish I could remember that moment. I think it was more like have a seat and a beer.
Yeah, it is funny. It's funny how you can think about things like I kept thinking about when I met James, that I'd be blubbering all over the place. Of course, then I got to the airport out in Portland, and he and Cece and the family decided to go out and eat. So Uncle Rhett arrived at the airport, and he can never take it back. Nobody was there for me. I just lumbered around the airport at midnight. I'm lumbering around. I'm hungry. I'm supposed to be.
Sensitive you are.
I'm supposed to be hugging my.
Those issues.
Huh?
You see how sensitive you are to those issues, those feelings of loss, abandonment, rejection. That's your stuff right there, man.
Yeah. Well, I like that stuff. I like to milk it for all it's worth, too.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have James. When we make the movie, we'll have to reenact that and hug each other and really cry.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't cry at either of my reunions. Honestly, I mean, I did it. I did a lot of crying on the phone. I did a lot of crying ahead of time, but meeting. I didn't cry meeting any of my family members. My grandmother was the closest one, actually. Yeah. When her reaction, because she didn't expect me. Like everyone else knew that we were meeting, it was planned, right? But my grandmother had no idea. She came out of left field, and her reaction of seeing me and learning who I was just amazing. And
but I have another.
I cried a little.
I have another theory, though. You could trust an old person to be sincere, whereas when you get with the human being, we've been wounded so much. It's very hard to go. Hey, wait a second. Until I know, it's kind of like when I go to a movie. If I'm by myself and there's nobody around me, I can cry. But if I got, Barbara's with me or somebody else is near me or there's people right behind me and, it's like, and I'm known in this community, got billboards and stuff. And so it's like, I'm the radio guy and it's like, oh, I can't let anybody see me cry, so I'll have to rent the movie again when it comes out, But anyway, so enough of that crap. Let's move along here. So
I think it's a good point, though. I think the point is this.
Yeah.
And you both reinforce the same thing. Is that because you've been wounded early in life.
Yeah.
That it's hard to trust. It's hard to know if it's real.
Yeah.
It's hard to leave yourself vulnerable again.
Yeah.
So it just takes some time. So even though I look at this guy and I'm like, part of me is like mad at him. Like, what do you mean you were part of this whole thing? I mean, you know what I mean? So you don't really know where you stand. So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered. And so there's a lot of ambivalence. So it's hard to like, you know, so I totally get why, you know, you wouldn't be bawling your brains out when this whole thing